I knew something was wrong before I even killed the engine. The mountain road up to my property looked different in a way I couldn't immediately name. Too much open sky where there should have been roofline. Too much light where there should have been shade. I pulled in and stepped out of my truck, and the sound my boots made wasn't the crunch of gravel. It was the crack of splintered wood. Because where my house used to stand, there was nothing left but splinters and a half-buried mailbox that still had my name printed on it in gold lettering. Benjamin Powers. I stood there for a full minute, heart hammering, trying to make my brain catch up to what my eyes were showing me. Then I heard that voice, high-pitched, nasal, the particular tone of someone who has spent years treating every conversation like a courtroom where they've already won. Well, well, if it isn't Mr. Too Good for HOA rules himself. I turned around slowly. Amber Bellington, president of the Silver Ridge Homeowners Association. She was holding a clipboard like it was a ceremonial weapon, and she wore that tight, smug smile the way certain people wear a uniform. Not because it fits right, but because they believe it gives them authority. "You did this?" I said. My voice came out low and quiet, which is what happens to my voice when I'm genuinely furious rather than just irritated. "We issued multiple warnings, Benjamin." She flipped through her papers with practiced efficiency. "You failed to pay over $7,000 in fines, code violations, unauthorized deck extension, non-compliant fence height, and of course the infamous sunflower flag." I looked at her. "You demolished a house over a flag." She raised her eyebrows like I'd asked whether the sky was blue. "It was political imagery against HOA decorum." I told her it was a sunflower, the state flower. She shrugged. "It's not our fault you refused to cooperate. We followed proper escalation procedures." I asked her where the demolition permit was. She told me it was approved by the board. Unanimous vote. I said, "You mean your cousin Todd and your wine club friend Cheryl?" She said it was still a vote, already spinning on her heel. "You should have read the bylaws, Benjamin. You're not above the rules just because you think you're special." She walked back toward her white Lexus. I stood there in the dust where my porch used to be, watching her go. And here's the thing that Amber Bellington had no way of knowing, because I had kept a deliberately low profile since moving up here. Grew out my beard, wore flannel, didn't talk much about my work. The neighbors just figured I was some quiet guy who liked hiking and grilling steaks on weekends. None of them knew I was the governor of the entire state, and Amber had just declared war on the wrong man. I didn't drive back to the Capitol that night. I booked a room at the old lodge down the mountain road, the kind of place with creaky floors and hand-carved banisters where nobody asks questions. They remembered me from before the election, back when I was just a person looking for a piece of land to call home. Back when I was nobody in particular. Now I was something else. A man with authority and a reason to use it carefully. The next morning, I was sitting across from Sheriff Rick Callahan at 7:30. Rick has a handshake like a bear trap and the eyes of a man who has seen enough of what people are capable of that very little surprises him anymore. He didn't waste time on pleasantries when I dropped the folder on his desk. "You're telling me they leveled your entire house?" "I'm not telling you," I said. "I'm showing you." Inside the folder were high-resolution satellite images from the state's Department of Geographic Information. I had called in a favor less than an hour after Amber drove off. The images showed the house standing on Wednesday, flattened by Friday morning. No storms, no accidents, just a paid demolition crew with a backhoe and nothing, not one document, on file with the county. Rick turned through the pages, his frown deepening with every photograph. "They told my office it was an accessory structure," he said. "A shed or something. Didn't even go through zoning." He looked up at me. "They lied." "That's not a civil issue," I said. "That's criminal misrepresentation." Rick sat back, tapping the folder. "You want me to bring them in?" "Not yet," I said. "I want to know who signed off on the demolition crew. The company, the contract, the payment. Follow the money. When you know the whole shape of it, then we move." He nodded slowly. "If what you're saying checks out, This isn't just about some HOA overstepping. This is organized fraud, possibly conspiracy to commit property destruction. He looked at me with something that might have been the beginning of a smile. You always did think like a prosecutor. I didn't respond to that, not out loud. By noon, I was sitting in a folding chair at the back of the community pool house in jeans and a windbreaker, a state ID badge clipped to my shirt. I hadn't announced myself. A court order from the district superior judge, compelling the HOA board to open the meeting to residents, citing ongoing investigations and the public's right to transparency, did the announcing for me. The door opened. Cheryl Evans, the HOA secretary, blinked at the sight of me. Her lips parted but produced no sound. She stepped back and I walked past her into the room. Amber was at the head of the table, sipping from a tall, insulated cup and scrolling through her tablet. Her expression flickered for a fraction of a second when she saw me, something between surprise and calculation, before she arranged her face into something tight and composed. I wasn't aware we had guests. You're aware now, I said, walking to the center of the room. This meeting is now public, by court order. Her jaw twitched, but she didn't argue. Not with a dozen residents filing in behind me. I addressed the board directly. The structure your crew demolished last Thursday was not an accessory building. It was a state-registered primary residence with full occupancy permits, verified by the county assessor's office. Amber glanced at Todd, the treasurer, who looked like he'd very much prefer to be somewhere else on the planet. You claimed unpaid fines as justification, I continued. Fines which, according to your own ledgers, were never formally invoiced, never sent certified, and never itemized with applicable bylaw references. Amber shifted. We have internal processes. Not anymore, I said. As of this morning, the state has frozen all HOA financial operations pending investigation. The gasps that moved through the room were genuine. Even Cheryl looked stunned. You can't do that, Amber said. We're a private entity. You have no jurisdiction here. I pulled a single sheet from my folder and handed it to her. Emergency executive order, I said, signed under state authority. You'll note the relevant language. In cases of fraud, misrepresentation, or destruction of private property under false pretenses, all community governance bodies are subject to legal audit. The State Attorney General's office is assigning an independent special investigator, neutral. You'll have no involvement in that process. I added more quietly, and just so we're clear, I'm recusing myself from any oversight role. Todd Vance, the treasurer, shoved back from the table. You're trying to ruin us. No, I said. You did that when you hired a demolition crew using embezzled community funds. The room went completely silent. Cheryl's pen hit the floor. She said, Wait, what? And looked genuinely stricken. I turned toward her. The check that paid for the crew came from the Community Improvement Fund. It was listed as landscape leveling. You and Todd both signed off on it. I didn't know what it was for, she said, voice shaking. You initialed the disbursement, I replied. Either you were grossly negligent or complicit. Todd stood up. I'm not going down for this. Amber filled out the disbursement forms. She told us it was for park maintenance. You're lying, Amber hissed. No, you're lying, Todd shouted back, the controlled presentation completely gone now. You've been siphoning funds for months. I saw the receipts. Patio heaters at your house, paid for with HOA money. Enough, I said, raising a hand. Rick Callahan stepped into the room, flanked by two deputies. We've seen enough, Rick said simply. Amber Bellington, Todd Vance, you're both under arrest for misuse of community funds, criminal misrepresentation, and destruction of private property. The room erupted in stunned murmuring. Amber tried to backpedal, started a sentence that didn't find its ending. The deputies secured her wrists with a professional calm she had no answer for. Rick read her rights with the flat, practiced delivery of a man who has done it 100 times, for whom none of it is a performance. I walked out before the cuffs clicked shut. I didn't need to see that part. Outside, a few neighbors stood near the pool gate watching everything unfold. One man nodded at me with an expression that I hadn't seen much of in Silver Ridge lately. Respect, unguarded and real. I walked past him without saying anything. There was still a lot of work to do. 3 days after the arrest, I stood in the wreckage of my kitchen while a forensic survey team worked around me, measuring, photographing, calling out notes to each other in the particular shorthand of people who have trained themselves to treat destruction as a puzzle. Orange evidence flags fluttered in the morning breeze throughout the debris. A fire inspector named Darnell crouched near a support beam, then stood and pulled off his gloves. "You were lucky to catch this when you did," he said. The sheriff's office had called him in after finding chemical traces in the wreckage that didn't match a standard demolition. "Someone tampered with the structure before they leveled it," Darnell told me. "Accelerants in the floorboards, industrial solvent, not something you pick up at a hardware store. Looks like they wanted to make sure it couldn't be rebuilt." He looked at me steadily. This wasn't about code violations. This was planned. Someone wanted this place erased. I stared at what remained of the fireplace I'd built myself from reclaimed stone. No code violation explains soaking a house in flammable chemicals before knocking it down. "Send everything to the AG's office," I said. "Full report, complete chain of custody." Darnell nodded and moved his team toward the perimeter. I turned back toward my truck, where a woman in tailored navy slacks and tortoiseshell glasses was waiting with a tablet in hand. Special Investigator Lena Brooks, assigned by the Attorney General's office. She got straight to the point. "It's bigger than Cheryl's patio heaters." She pulled up a map of Silver Ridge and the surrounding parcels on her screen. "We've uncovered financial transfers routed through shell companies tied to the HOA's Improvement Fund. Over the last 16 months, more than $250,000 moved into off-book accounts." I raised an eyebrow. "Personal enrichment, partly," she said, "but most of it was used to purchase surrounding properties at auction. Parcels that had gone into foreclosure after residents were hit with inflated fines." I stood with that for a moment. "They were driving people out," I said slowly, "so they could buy the land." "Correct. And once they controlled enough of the surrounding lots, they planned to consolidate and sell to a development firm. We've already subpoenaed the firm's records. They had a standing agreement to purchase the entire ridge once the HOA secured 75% of the acreage. I knew before she said the name. Amber Bellington brokered the deal. "She was the point of contact," Lena confirmed. "But she didn't act alone. We found emails implicating a consulting group in Denver that specializes in what they call community revitalization projects. They've done this before, in other states." The pieces assembled themselves with the particular cold clarity of understanding something that was always there once you know where to look. Silver Ridge wasn't just an HOA president's power trip. It was a long con, a land grab dressed up as neighborhood governance. "Where's the money now?" "Frozen," Lena said. "We believe they were preparing to move it offshore. You stopped this just in time." An unmarked SUV pulled up behind us. Two men in suits stepped out. One handed Lena a folder. "We've got confirmation," he said, glancing at me. "The demolition crew was subcontracted through a shell contractor with no operating license. The owner is Todd Vance's brother-in-law. Payment was cash." Lena snapped the folder shut. "We'll move forward with federal charges. This crosses state lines." After they left, I sat on the tailgate of my truck looking out over the valley. The ridge was quiet, genuinely quiet, for what felt like the first time in a long time. No clipboard-wielding HOA officials pacing the streets. No petty threats taped to people's front doors. Just wind through the trees. That afternoon, I called a town hall meeting. The community center hadn't seen a crowd like it in years. Every seat filled, people standing in the aisles, lining the back wall. Retirees, teachers, young families. Some faces I recognized, others I didn't. But every face held the same thing: tension, and underneath it the particular fragile alertness of people who have been told for a long time that they don't have the right to ask questions. I stood at the front without a podium or microphone, just the room and the people who had been walked over by the system that was supposed to serve them. I didn't come here today as your governor, I said. I came here as your neighbor, as one of you, someone who believed this place could be a home. A few heads nodded. What was done to this community wasn't just unethical, it was criminal. You were lied to, manipulated. Your homes were leveraged against you. When some of you couldn't pay the fines they invented, they took your land and sold it behind your backs. A man in the fourth row clenched his jaw. His hand tightened around the armrest. I saw it happen. But that ends now, I said. The Silver Ridge HOA has been formally dissolved. The board is under federal investigation. Starting today, a provisional council made up of volunteer residents will oversee community decisions until we can hold new, transparent elections. Someone in the back clapped, then another person. Then it spread through the room in the way applause does when it means something. Every fine issued in the last 2 years, every fabricated charge, every retaliatory penalty will be reviewed. If it was illegitimate, it will be voided and refunded. A woman near the front wiped her eyes. I know trust doesn't come back overnight, I said, but it starts with truth. And with your help, we're going to rebuild this place. Not just the homes, the principles we thought we were living under. Afterward, people approached one by one. A retired firefighter with a background in construction volunteered to lead the rebuilding effort. Residents who had been driven out said they were ready to testify in court. An older man told me his wife's garden had been bulldozed. It was the last thing she planted before she passed, and that he was ready to plant something new. He said he bet he wasn't the only one. The applause that followed him wasn't loud or theatrical. It was steady and earnest, which is the better kind. I got a call from Lena a month later while I was stacking firewood behind my new porch frame. She didn't waste words. We found something buried in the HOA's server backups. Encrypted files. It took a while, but we cracked them this morning. She described audio recordings from the board, not official meeting notes, but off-the-books files recorded on a private device belonging to Todd Vance. Recordings made 3 days before my house came down. She patched in the file. The audio was grainy but clear enough. Amber's voice first, sharper than I remembered. We can't wait for another lien to process. The governor's too high profile. We need a clean break. Remove the structure and bury the paper trail. Then Todd, what if it backfires? Amber again. It won't. The crew's off record. The permits are ghosted. By the time he figures it out, the land's already transferred. A hesitation, then Cheryl's voice, quieter. And if the press finds out? Amber, say it was a mistake. Blame miscommunication. He's a politician. He'll want it buried. Lena's voice returned. That recording alone nails conspiracy. But there's a second file from the following day. Amber talking to someone not on any board roster. Male, older. They ran the voice print. The match came back as Byron Kepler. A name I recognized immediately. He didn't live in Silver Ridge. He lived in a Denver penthouse and ran a private equity firm that specialized in what he called distressed property acquisition. The kind of man who always wears 2 watches and never answers his own phone. Lena told me he'd promised Amber a 5% commission on the development deal and a seat on the advisory board once construction began. She'd sold out her entire community for a side arrangement and a property in Vail. She signed a purchase agreement 2 days before the demolition. I want a federal prosecutor on this immediately, I said. She confirmed Kepler's firm was already under investigation for racketeering, and that if they could link him to similar HOA land flip schemes across the western states, they were looking at a full criminal enterprise. I told her to get the IRS involved as well. A man like Kepler doesn't report commission income on illegal deals. I drove to the county courthouse that afternoon and found Assistant DA Rachel Perez in a conference room surrounded by color-coded case files, sleeves rolled up, deep in the work. I asked whether she could bring a RICO charge. She turned toward me, eyes sharp. If we can prove multiple people coordinated with intent to defraud residents and use the HOA structure to facilitate that fraud, yes. Kepler's involvement gives us the interstate element we need. I asked about the residents who had lost their homes to fraudulent fines, whether their property could be recovered. She nodded. Injunctions had already been filed to freeze all HOA-controlled properties and halt pending transfers. Once convictions came, they would move to reverse the deeds. 3 days later, Byron Kepler was arrested at a private airfield outside Aspen. Lena had coordinated with the U.S. Marshals. He had been attempting to board a charter jet to the Cayman Islands. On him, 2 burner phones, a briefcase with currency from 5 different countries, and a flash drive containing a list of other HOA partners across 3 states. The operation in Silver Ridge wasn't unique. It was one location in a systematic scheme that had been running for years. Back in Silver Ridge, people were rebuilding more than just structures. The new community council had established a legal defense fund for residents still fighting to reclaim their properties. A retired legal clerk named Warren organized case files. A local librarian offered library space for document scanning and printing. At the next council meeting, I sat at the back and just listened. The energy in the room was different from anything I had experienced in the HOA era. Focused, purposeful, unafraid. People spoke without looking over their shoulders first. In the months that followed, the state legislature passed 3 laws governing HOA operations statewide. Mandatory third-party audits, public disclosure requirements for all board financial decisions, and the creation of a state-run ombudsman agency empowered to investigate HOA abuse without waiting for individual complaints. The Silver Ridge case became the model for all 3. Kepler's trial drew national attention. Lena testified. So did I. The jury deliberated for less than 2 days. Guilty on all counts. He received 20 years without parole. His firm was dissolved, assets liquidated. A portion of the proceeds went directly into a restitution fund for the communities he had systematically gutted. Amber, Todd, and Cheryl were banned from holding any governance position in any residential community for life. Their plea agreements included restitution payments, community service, and public apologies broadcast in prime time. The developer who had planned to purchase the Ridge backed out under public pressure. Their stock dropped 8% in a week. As for Silver Ridge itself, it changed in ways that are harder to document than the legal outcomes, but easier to feel. People who had never spoken to each other started sharing tools and building fences together. The new council held open meetings streamed online. The old atmosphere of low-grade fear that had settled over the neighborhood during Amber's tenure, the sense that any deviation from her preferences might bring consequences, was gone. Replaced by something that functions better and is harder to take away. I never rebuilt the house the way it was. I worked with a retired firefighter and a crew of volunteers to design something different, smaller. A deep porch, wide windows facing the valley. Nothing that needed to be impressive, just solid and honest, and mine in the way things are mine when you've made them yourself. When winter came and the fire inside burned steady, I didn't think about the wreckage. I thought about what we'd built afterward, and about the particular quality of a community that has been taken from people and then returned. One afternoon, as snow started falling, a boy of about 10 rode his bike up my gravel path and handed me a folded piece of paper. A hand-drawn map of Silver Ridge, the lots, the trails, even the creek labeled in pencil. In the corner he had written in careful 10-year-old handwriting, "Thanks for saving our town." He didn't wait for a response, just turned and pedaled back toward the road. I stood there with the map for a long time. Then I pinned it above my workbench, where it still hangs. Here is what I want you to take from this story. The Amber Bellingtons of the world, the people who turn small, local positions of authority into instruments of extraction and control, they are never operating alone, and they are never operating from strength. They operate from the assumption that the people around them are too tired, too isolated, too uncertain of their own rights to look closely at what's being done to them. They count on the gap between what the rules say and what most people think the rules say. They count on people not attending meetings, not reading bylaws, not following the money, not talking to each other. What happened in Silver Ridge stopped when people started paying attention. When one person took the first step of not accepting what he was told at face value, of driving to the county clerk's office and asking to see the records, of calling the sheriff and saying, "Here's the documentation and here's what it means." And then when other people, the board member who kept his head down but kept his eyes open, the ER nurse who had been watching for 2 years and waiting for a moment to act, the retired clerk who organized files, the firefighter who picked up a hammer, when those people joined in, the structure that depended on everyone being separate and confused and afraid simply collapsed. They gate-locked. Pay attention to what's happening on the other side of it.